Agradecemos al Instituto de Ingeniería por las facilidades que nos otorga utilizar sus auditorios. Y bueno, para no tomarles más tiempo y entrar a la presentación, rápidamente presentaré a la doctora Lucia De Stefano. Muchísimas gracias por estar con nosotros esta tarde. Y al doctor Dustin Garrik. Thank you very much for being with us. Bueno, la presentación va a ser en inglés y español, entonces creo que vamos a hacer Span-English un poco y bueno, siéntanse con libertad también de preguntar, de hacer sus preguntas al final en español o si prefieren el inglés también. Bueno, la doctora Lucia De Stefano es subdirectora del Observatorio de Agua de la Fundación Botín y profesora titular interina de la Facultad de Geológicas de la Universidad Complutense de Madrid. También es consultora internacional y ha trabajado en la Agencia de Cooperación de los Estados Unidos, en el Banco Mundial, en la Universidad de Oxford y en la Universidad de Oregon. Es licenciada en Ciencias Geológicas por la Universidad degli Stati di Pravia, en Italia, y doctora por la Universidad Complutense de Madrid. Recibió su formación de postdoctorado por el Program in Water Conflict Management and Transformation en Estados Unidos, en el IHE de UNESCO, la Universidad Complutense de Madrid, la Universidad Politécnica de Madrid y el International Institute for Geoinformation Science and Earth Observation en Holanda. Asimismo, ha sido profesora visitante en la Universidad de Oregon y en la Universidad de Colorado. Desde 2010 ha llevado a cabo, está a cargo de varios proyectos de investigación sobre políticas de agua en España y en América Latina, en el marco del Observatorio del Agua de la Fundación Botín. Ha sido investigadora en la Universidad de Oregon y ha trabajado en el tema de conflictos de agua y variabilidad climática, también sobre la evaluación de la gobernanza del agua en el norte de África y Medio Oriente. Previamente trabajó como experta en política de agua por la WWF y por la WWF también en España, y como especialista en gestión del agua y del territorio en el sector privado. Entre sus principales ámbitos de trabajo e investigación destacan la planificación hidrológica y la gestión de los recursos hídricos en distintas escalas, la evaluación de políticas públicas medioambientales, la gestión de la sequía, el análisis de la resiliencia a la variabilidad climática y la evaluación de atributos de la buena gobernanza del agua. Muchísimas gracias, doctora. Y el doctor Dustin E. Garrik, él es profesor en manejo integral del agua en the Smith School of Enterprise and Environment en la Universidad de Oxford. Su trabajo él analiza las políticas, las instituciones y los incentivos que se dirigen hacia la escasez del agua y la variabilidad climática, especialmente en las cuencas bajo estrés hídrico. También, su trabajo tiene como línea de investigación el tema de seguridad del agua. También ha hecho trabajos importantes sobre la práctica y las relaciones que existen entre los distintos sectores, sector público, sector privado y la academia. Tiene especial interés también en las redes de colaboración entre los sectores. Tiene una importante producción de artículos que han sido publicados en el Annual Review of Environment and Resources, en la Physiological Transactions of the Royal Society. También, sus proyectos han sido financiados a través de los fondos de los consejos de investigación de Canadá y de Australia. Investiga como líneas de investigación también tiene la adaptación a climas extremos y tanto en Norteamérica como en Australia. Actualmente él se desempeña como profesor profesor en la Universidad de Oxford desde julio del 2016. También es director del Water Policy at Master University y también es investigador en la Universidad de Oxford y del Fulbright Scholar in Australia. Pues muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much. So we start. Vamos a get the roadmasters. You can move from here.
Okay. Muchas gracias por la invitación y debe decir que entiendo más que hablo español, entonces voy a seguir en inglés. Thank you once again for the invitation, the hospitality from Jorge and Fernando and from the rest of the group. Today, along with my colleague Lucia De Stefano, we'll be talking about the challenge of water security and the pathways taken by rivers under pressure to achieve water security. Sharing some lessons from work in Australia, the Western US, and Spain, as well as some international research that has brought us here to Mexico to learn from the experiences in the Rio Bravo in particular. The focus of the talk is going to be on water allocation as a response to water insecurity challenges. And we're going to frame some of the challenges around water allocation, competition between sectors, and the impacts of climate variability and change, as well as the responses. At the Smith School of Enterprise and the Environment at the University of Oxford, I direct the water program where our work focuses on the interface between water and the economy. The goal, developing research with practitioners that can deliver impacts for sustaining growth, reducing inequality, and enhancing freshwater resilience. It's in that context that we'll share some of the perspectives and experiences with water allocation reform globally. The main message of the talk is that water misallocation is fundamentally a governance challenge. It's not only a governance challenge, but governance, including the dedication of resources, investment, and the construction and management of infrastructure, is critical to addressing the competition conflicts between different water users and sectors. So we are going to frame some of the governance challenges and identify the pathways taken to respond to them. These pictures are taken from El Rio, Colorado, where I started my work as a PhD student at the University of Arizona, and it illustrates the many different values, economic, ecological, cultural values that depend on functioning rivers, starting with the delta here in Mexico, as well as energy production, irrigation, the dominant use, and cities, illustrated here by the Bellagio fountains in Las Vegas, which have been described as the highest marginal productivity of water in the Colorado River because of the contribution it makes to the economy in Las Vegas. The challenge of water allocation, the governance challenges associated with water allocation, involve managing these competing needs in a context of climate variability and change. The first question is water misallocated? And specifically, what do we mean by water being misallocated? One common definition focuses on water misallocation in terms of water stress and over-allocation or over-exploitation of aquifers, where you can see an evolution from water use represented by the red dot over time reaching sustainable boundaries, and in some cases exceeding sustainable boundaries of water use, requiring the allocation or reallocation of water across different sectors. One definition of water misallocation is that in situ uses or environmental flows are unmet. And we see many examples of this definition of misallocation in rivers that are considered closed river basins, which means that the river basins no longer reliably meet downstream demands or needs. This picture, again taken from the Colorado River, will be familiar to many of you. It shows the outflows, the flows downstream from the last major reservoir in the Colorado River, the Hoover Dam. And after the construction of the Hoover Dam in the 1930s, the reduction in outflows that eventually reach some of the downstream users. And this is an example where some important demands in the lower part of the basin are either not being met or facing increasing competition in the face of sustained droughts. We're seeing this pressure occur in all parts of the world. The Yellow River in China, and in the Murray-Darling Basin of Southeast Australia, where I've done extensive work, where you see another pictures of outflows over time. You see the stair-step diagram, which show the construction of reservoirs in the Murray-Darling Basin and the cumulative storage provided by those reservoirs, and then the outflows, the average outflows during periods before, during, and after the development period in this river basin. This period in the early 2000s was a period of exceptional reductions in outflows due to what's called the Millennium Drought, a 13-year drought which created intense pressure within the river and prompted efforts to build flexibility, efficiency, and sustainability into water allocation. In Mexico and in many parts of the world, the issue of rivers under pressure can't be considered without considering the groundwater impacts. This is a picture of the state of Washington in the Northwest US, and typically for my students, I offer a beer for anyone who can guess what the blue dots are. Any volunteers?
What else?
That's right. And when that answer comes through, I say, I'm only going to give you a half pint because it's a specific type of well. It's what's called a permit-exempt well, an exempt well that doesn't require a permit because these are household residential wells with limited pumping capacity. Individually, the impact is minimal. Cumulatively, you can see that this can pose pressures on the river system. And over 3 periods of time, from 1940, 1970, and 2007, you see the exponential growth in this type of water demand. So the question is how to manage some of this competition. The challenges associated with water misallocation can broadly be categorized in terms of the challenges of managing transboundary waters, where water resources cross political borders, the challenges of allocating water between competing rural uses, it could be agriculture and mining, rural versus environmental demands, rural and urban versus urban water demands. Increasingly, we're finding that these challenges of misallocation are driven by the population growth and associated demands of urbanization. And in the study by Podolsky and Garrik, you see surface water dependent cities in the world where up to 35% of these surface water dependent cities are facing water supply vulnerability due to competition with agricultural users. So in this context, we propose to define water misallocation based on the ability to allocate water efficiently and equitably and over time. So often when we talk about water allocation, we want an efficient use of water represented by the blue line, where water is allocated to its highest economic use. We also want an allocation of water that will be considered fair, which is to say that it's just and fair allocation. So water is considered to be effectively allocated when it is addressing both efficiency goals and equity goals, and it may be considered misallocated when it is creating a trade-off between the two. And what we also have to emphasize is that in the ability to achieve an efficient and equitable allocation in the short term may make it difficult to adapt in face of changing pressures. So an effective water allocation includes the ability to achieve efficiency and equity, but also to maintain flexibility to provide those goals and outcomes over the long term. So we've been considering how to achieve an efficient and equitable water allocation that provides the sustainability and the flexibility to adapt. What are the pathways to water security in the rivers under pressure? The first point is to say that there's been an increasing emphasis of moving from individual projects and policy interventions to thinking about portfolios or integrated pathways that combine institutional reform, information systems, and infrastructure as interdependent and mutually reinforcing. As an outcome of some work funded by the OECD and the Global Water Partnership, we examined and reconstructed historical pathways to water security in different parts of the world to show how these three types of interventions developed over time. In fact, we're fortunate to have the input from Jorge and Fernando on the analysis of Mexico City's pathway to water security. And what these experiences show is that pathways require the coordinated developments of each of these three elements. And by looking at pathways in different parts of the world, we know that context matters, but some general lessons came through. First, that there's a need to move from projects to pathways to understand the interdependency, the combination of institutions, information, and infrastructure needed to achieve water security. The need to understand and respond to triggers or crises, and the notion that never waste a crisis, but don't wait for one, including the types of planning and proactive approaches to water allocation and water resource management needed to achieve water security. Information is the pillar or foundation for legitimacy and cooperation, and capacity is needed at every level, from the bottom up to the national. And finally, to consider that not all investments are beneficial. The planning needs to be smart and strategic. There also needs to be the capacity to evaluate performance over time. So what do pathways look like in terms of water allocation and the ability to transform water allocation? It's recognizing that in any given place, you'll have a starting point. And the goal is, on the y-axis or vertical dimension here, to try to improve water allocation and achieve the outcomes that were described earlier by investing in a set of economic and institutional responses. I'm going to take a brief moment to talk specifically about water markets as an institutional response to competition over water. The starting point is to recognize that water markets are one means of achieving efficient water allocation, allocating water to highest economic use. And in different parts of the world that are facing water stress, such as Australia, Chile, and the Western US, research has demonstrated that there's a strong potential to generate gains from trade, to improve economic welfare and economic outcomes. For example, in the Murray-Darling Basin of Southeast Australia, the estimated total value of water entitlements is $12 billion because an active market has developed. In many other parts of the world where there's interest in these types of tools, barriers exist to developing them. And the question is, how do you overcome some of the barriers that exist when the exempt groundwater wells and other types of challenges prevent the incentives from being developed to allocate water efficiently and equitably? The first challenge is to overcome the problem of transaction costs. The costs associated with defining, measuring, and transferring water rights. These involve the cost of searching for willing buyers and sellers, negotiating over the price of water, and enforcing the agreements that exist. In this picture, I won't take long to go through, but it's in the simplest example, it shows two farms with different productivity. And in the starting point, water is allocated equally between the two farms, and the farm with the higher productivity, represented by this line, is seeking water from the farm with lower productivity, represented by this line. When you account for these transaction costs, it ends up reducing the scope for reallocating the water to the more productive farm. And in some places, it negates those gains from trade. What transaction costs force us to do is to think through, in more specific terms, what are the underlying factors, culturally, physically, economically, that are creating these barriers? Transaction costs are important in this context because they represent anywhere from 3 to 70% of the total costs of reallocating water through water markets. And the lesson is, in terms of addressing and reducing these costs, is to develop governance capacity that is relevant for the local context. the work by Nobel laureates Elinor Ostrom and Oliver Williamson have shown that transaction costs exist, but they'll be minimized by different institutional arrangements in different situations. It's getting the right fit for the local context. So one area where markets have developed illustrate these challenges associated with water misallocation, as well as the potential for innovation that comes through the development of water markets. This is the Columbia Basin in the Pacific Northwest US and Western Canada. It's a river basin which isn't commonly thought to be water stressed or scarce, but its interior regions are semi-arid and irrigation agricultural dominated. It's in this region where there's been an effort to use water markets to reallocate water from irrigation to support residential growth and development, as well as the unmet environmental needs associated with salmon fisheries and salmon habitat that require minimum flows to survive. And analysis and evaluation of these markets focused on the amount of water recovered through water markets, the cost of recovering that water, and the total capacity. And the main lessons can be taken by focusing on the circles that are in this map. 4 of the 13 catchments or watersheds analyzed had been able to recover a relatively high amount of water using these water markets. But there's a difference between the green circles and the orange circles. In the green circles, these regions simultaneously invested in implementing water reallocation projects, as well as invested in capacity development and building, including strong governance capacity. Whereas those in the orange, they were able to recover relatively high amount of water in the initial periods of this program, but in subsequent periods encountered substantial resistance and were no longer able to recover water for the environment through these methods. So it really showed the importance of those investments in both implementing projects and continued policy reform. What can also be shown from this experience is that context matters in the development of organizational approaches that are relevant for the local conditions, but there are some general lessons, such as the importance of crises we saw in the previous work on pathways as an opening, a window of opportunity for implementing reforms that could, in other periods, encounter some resistance. And there's the need for that long-term perspective when developing these water allocation reform pathways that involve both demonstration or proof of concept that water markets can work, but also the efforts to strengthen institutional frameworks to deal with the challenges over time. One thing we find, however, is that many places of the world where there's demand for water reallocation have substantial transaction costs, and these costs have impeded efforts to build flexibility, sustainability, and efficiency into water allocation. In a study about the potential for water markets in Italy and Spain, for example, some modeling results demonstrated that 1,500 euros, the transaction costs of 1,500 euros, were enough to negate or erase the potential gains from trade through water markets, which means that relatively limited amounts of costs would make it very difficult to use these tools for improving water allocation. So that leads us to this question of how do you develop the pathways to water security and water allocation reform. And it's useful to look at the experience of the Murray-Darling Basin in Australia because it has developed one of the more advanced water markets globally. In the southeast portion of Australia, the Murray-Darling Basin encompasses approximately 1 million square kilometers. It's shared by 4 states, territory, and governed by a national agency. And it's been viewed as one of the strongest examples of a water market because of its ability to respond to the Millennium Drought that I mentioned at the outset of the talk. In the Millennium Drought, you have this period starting from 1998 to 99 to 2010. And this is water availability during this period. You can see in 2006 and 2000 to 2009 that water availability was reduced substantially, and up to 70% reduction in water availability. Water markets and water reallocation were able to reallocate water to the most productive sectors of this predominantly agricultural basin, and therefore, despite the reduction in water availability by 70%, the gross value of agriculture was only reduced by 20%. Often the focus is, how can we develop a water market like Australia, the miracle of the market that Australia experienced? And that's why it's helpful to think of not only the transaction costs of implementing water reallocation projects, but the transition costs, the cost for moving from one institutional status quo to a new one, or the cost of going through the reforms of policies and institutions, as well as the associated infrastructure and information systems to develop these types of allocation frameworks and account for both the efficiency and equity challenges associated with them. The first lesson about the transition costs associated with the Murray-Darling is that scaling up takes time. The miracle of the market can also be thought of as a 30-year overnight success. The 1980s were really the initial period for a focused reform process to develop the institutional framework governing water markets. And you see that continuing to adapt and change over time and to incorporate issues related to environmental sustainability. The second lesson is that the efficiency outcomes that we heard in terms of the Millennium Drought depended on substantial investments in funding, and scaling up the water market requires money. This chart demonstrates with the red and the blue bars the growth in trading activity over time. And you see during the Millennium Drought, trading activity increased to provide that flexibility and to increase the efficiency of water allocation. The gold bars are correlated directly with this trading activity and represent the federal or national expenditures in the water reform process. And it shows that water markets went hand in hand with the development of federal and state level institutional reforms to support the development of the water market and to address some of the unintended consequences and challenges associated with the market. The third lesson from the Murray-Darling is that these transition costs and these pathways required embedding the water market, placing the water market within a framework of basin governance institutions to coordinate the planning and other types of information and activities within a river basin context or a hydrological boundary, and account for the associated connections between different users and between the users and the environment within this basin. And what this chart shows is the annual contributions to the operating budget for the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, a federal authority, and its predecessor, the Murray-Darling Basin Commission, which was an interstate council or commission to provide those planning initiatives and supporting frameworks. And what it shows in the case of the Murray-Darling Basin is that there's been a substantial and steady investment of approximately $100 million adjusted for inflation per year to provide this basin governance institution and all the services that it undertakes for the market and other planning objectives within this river basin. And keeping in mind the $100 million, this $100 million annual contribution is for a basin that supports approximately 3 million people, as well as the agriculture produced by this river basin. So it ends up being a pretty substantial per capita or per person investment in the basin governance capacity needed for markets to provide a constructive role in water allocation. And finally, the fourth lesson from the pathway to water security and the water allocation reforms in the Murray-Darling Basin is that scaling up takes partnerships. We've heard about the the basin authority, the federal authority, but there are a number of other formal and informal bodies that are operating at many scales from the local level to the basin level, which were needed for this market reform process to be successful. The lessons being that these partnerships are both local and basin-wide. They're neither top-down nor bottom-up, and they could be considered to be polycentric rather than purely decentralized or purely centralized. They require that capacity at every level. So we've talked about the Murray-Darling Basin and some illustrations of the challenges across the world. I want to turn it over to Dr. De Stefano to walk us through the case study of transition in Spain.
Bueno, buenas tardes. Habíamos pensado que para dar un poco de movimiento a la charla, pues íbamos a alternarnos y también cambiar de idioma para que fuera así un poco más de movimiento. Y yo simplemente voy a comentar dos casos que ilustran lo que está hablando Dustin antes de las 3 Cs, cuando se habla de mover de pathways from projects to pathways, se habla de las 3 Cs, de información, infraestructuras e instituciones. Entonces yo voy a dar 2 ejemplos de información y de instituciones y las implicaciones de esos costes de transición para conseguir una reforma y un avance en esos 2 aspectos, basándome en la experiencia de España. La experiencia y digamos los mensajes que quiero dar son 4, ¿no? Y esos costes de transición y es la importancia de la transición. Primero, la importancia del tiempo. Cuando hay un cambio, hay una transición hacia otro sistema, otro modelo de gestión, pues el tiempo no hay formas de reducir el tiempo. Hace falta mucho tiempo para conseguir cambios. Y el papel que juegan los técnicos que trabajan en la administración, que tienen que encontrar la motivación y creerse ellos mismos que van a ser capaces, con la ayuda de otros, de crear un cambio dentro de su institución. Y la importancia de capacitar y con gota a gota conseguir un cambio de mentalidad, tanto dentro de la administración como en la sociedad. Y el cuarto mensaje que quiero dar es la importancia de medir esos cambios y de cuantificar los beneficios que se obtienen de esa transición. Entonces, el primer ejemplo, hablando de instituciones, es la experiencia de la aprobación e implementación de una normativa europea sobre agua, la Directiva Marco del Agua, que se aprobó en el año 2000 y lo que hace es fija que en todos los países, los miembros de la Unión Europea, hay que conseguir un buen estado de todas las aguas en una determinada fecha, ¿no? Se habla de 2015, 2021, 2027 y esta que se considera una directiva, una normativa europea muy ecologista, realmente tiene la idea de que solo preservando las fuentes es posible conseguir unos recursos en buen estado para satisfacer nuestras necesidades. Entonces, esa directiva que se aprobó en el año 2000 tuvo implicaciones en los objetivos fundamentales de la planificación hidrológica en España. A la izquierda veis la Ley de Aguas de 1985, el artículo 38 que fija los objetivos de la planificación. Y a este lado tenéis el texto refundido de la Ley de Aguas en 2001 que intenta reflejar ese cambio, ¿no? Y si observáis, en la Ley de Aguas del 85 se habla fundamentalmente que la planificación hidrológica tiene como objetivo principal la mejor satisfacción de las demandas de agua y equilibrar y armonizar el desarrollo regional y sectorial. Si nos fijamos en la Ley de Aguas de 2001, con ese cambio legislativo a nivel europeo, pues se añade el objetivo de conseguir un buen estado y la adecuada protección del dominio público hidráulico y de las aguas. Entonces, ese cambio que uno dice, pues no, entonces sabemos si lo que pone el papel aguanta todo, ¿no? Realmente hay en una película del gato se habla, ¿no?, de que todo tiene que cambiar para que no cambie nada. Y realmente, sin duda, ha habido mucho escepticismo y sigue habiendo mucho escepticismo sobre realmente que un cambio legal pueda convertirse en un cambio en la práctica, ¿no? Y yo misma he sido siempre la primera en dudar en ese cambio, ¿no? Mucho ruidos y pocas nueces. Pero si nos fijamos en la experiencia en España, se está viendo, ahora 17 años después, se está viendo que está habiendo un cambio gradual que queda guiado por ese cambio en la planificación, en los objetivos de la planificación. Decir que ese cambio realmente sí que surge de una necesidad de una nueva reasignación, ¿no? Aquí vemos la calidad el estado general de las aguas subterráneas a la izquierda, y como podéis imaginar, rojo significa que son acuíferos que están en mal estado, y en este lado pues veis lo mismo con los ríos, y como podéis imaginar también hay muchísimos ríos en rojo que tienen problemas serios y por tanto muestran que hay un síntoma de necesidad de reasignar y de replantearse cómo se gestiona el agua en España. Entonces, si nos fijamos en cuál ha sido, ¿no?, la historia desde de los últimos 40 años en España, nos hemos movido de una distribución de poderes que fue con la firma de la Constitución de 1978, donde los actores empezaban a repartirse el pastel, ¿no?, en cuanto a poder, a un plantearse cómo repartirse el agua. Y eso, digamos, el ejemplo clásico más típico fue en el año 2001, una serie de trasvases que se plantearon, y el más conocido es el trasvase del Ebro, donde se hablaba de repartirse el papel en cuanto a agua, el pastel en cuanto a agua. Y ahora, más recientemente, a partir de 2004, con la implementación de la directiva, pues sí que se está empezando a decir, vale, hasta ahora hemos hablado de repartirnos el poder, hemos hablado de repartirnos el agua, pero es que ahora quizás tenemos que empezar a hablar de cómo repartirnos el agua que ya está, no buscar nueva agua, y es un cambio que realmente está ocurriendo. Y lo que tengo que decir es que ese cambio puede ocurrir por el tiempo y puede ocurrir por el papel fundamental que juegan los técnicos que están trabajando para intentar buscar hacer cristalizar un cambio real desde las bases, ¿no? Apoyándose a la academia, apoyándose a la sociedad civil, pero realmente intentando romper ese techo de cristal que representa la distancia entre ellos y los políticos que finalmente toman las decisiones. El otro ejemplo que quiero poneros sobre información tiene que ver con el acceso a la información en temas de agua. Pues ha habido, ¿no?, desde los últimos 10-15 años, ha habido ejemplos de movimientos desde que llaman grassroots, ¿no?, desde la sociedad, ¿no?, desde la calle, para pedir otras formas de democracia. Tenemos, no sé si ha llegado aquí la experiencia del 15M en España, ¿no?, con la ocupación de una plaza durante muchos meses pidiendo otro tipo de democracia, Occupy Wall Street, y hubo la aprobación de una ley de transparencias en 2013, y también eso también se vería reflejado en los movimientos sociales en materia de agua. Entonces, nosotros nos propusimos estudiar, pues vimos que la información sin duda tiene un papel fundamental, ¿no?, en conseguir ese cambio, y en colaboración con Transparencia Internacional España realizamos un estudio, diseñamos un índice de transparencia de la gestión del agua, donde nuestra unidad de análisis eran los organismos de cuenca. Aplicamos fundamentalmente ese índice a España, pero también luego lo aplicamos en Brasil y en Portugal. Y obtuvimos unos resultados que reflejan esa necesidad la relevancia que tiene la información en esa redistribución del agua, ¿no? Los agujeros negros estaban los registros de agua, en las abstracciones de agua y en la redistribución del agua, estaban en las entradas, los ingresos de los organismos de cuenca, en los fondos utilizados para la gestión del agua y para la construcción de infraestructuras, y las relaciones entre el organismo de cuenca y sus proveedores y sus subcontratistas. Entonces, si vemos, ¿no?, aquí tenemos la gráfica, pues podemos observar que realmente los valores más bajos pues realmente se encuentran en esos tres ámbitos, ¿no?, de transparencia sobre uso y gestión del agua, sobre aspectos económicos y sobre contactos y servicios. Quisimos, a partir de ahí, ¿no?, ir más adelante, porque también la experiencia fue que esa experiencia de medir y dar difusión a esa calidad de información que había disponible en Internet, pues nos permitió avanzar mucho y crear sensibilización entre esos cuadros medios y altos en la administración, que realmente necesitaban apoyo desde fuera para ir a sus jefes a decirle: necesitamos poner más información, tenemos que ser más transparentes. Y realmente me ha ocurrido varias veces que me han dicho: gracias por hacer esto, porque eso me da pie a que yo pueda ir a hablar con mi jefe, poner encima de la mesa este informe y decirle: necesitamos dar más difusión a lo que hacemos y a los datos. Pero también nos dimos cuenta que no es suficiente con tener datos, entonces que esos datos tienen que ser reutilizables para que la academia o las empresas o también la sociedad civil, pues pueda trabajar con esos datos y sacar sus conclusiones. Y por tanto nos movimos hacia lo que se llama datos abiertos, donde los datos tienen que ser accesibles, reutilizables y actualizados. Y preguntamos a los gestores del agua cómo veían, ¿no?, que se podía hacer esa transición hacia datos, no solo tener los datos, sino tenerlos actualizados, reutilizables y gratuitos. Y ellos nos dijeron que realmente lo primero nos dimos cuenta que la administración pública es el primer usuario de esos datos y por tanto tiene todo interés en que estén bien organizados y estén disponibles, porque a menudo ocurre que entre las mismas agencias de la misma administración pues haya silencio total y incomunicación. Un funcionario me decía: gracias a lo que estés haciendo, pues puedo ir a mi vecino de despacho y pedirle que ponga los datos online y yo podré utilizarlos, ¿no? Entonces es importante que la administración entienda que es el primero que se va a beneficiar si hay una mayor difusión de los datos. Y también es importante, no vale con solo poner los datos, sino que hay que dar incentivo, hay que crear incentivos para que los datos se usen, porque si no hay beneficios, y eso es un mensaje muy importante, si no hay beneficios claros en ser más transparentes, si no se pueden medir desde el punto de vista económico y social los beneficios, en cuanto haya cambios o vaivenes políticos, lo primero que caerá es todo el tema de los datos. O sea, es algo que crea, también te deja vulnerable y por tanto, pues si no se ve que la gente los usa, que la gente se beneficia de ello, que se genera negocios, se genera riqueza, pues no vamos a ir muy lejos. Otra cosa que quedó clara hablando con los funcionarios es el tema de que no hay que empezar la casa por el tejado, ¿no? Ahí pongo una iglesia sin tejado, porque realmente el problema muchas veces es que los datos, la administración misma no tiene buenos datos. Les cuesta tener una estrategia, no por falta de capacidad, sino por falta a veces de recursos, falta de capacidad de trabajar a largo plazo, le falta esa capacidad de planificar de manera estratégica sobre cómo recoge, cómo almacena y cómo hace posible volver a utilizar esos datos. Es importante medir, como decía antes, medir la disponibilidad de datos y su calidad, y finalmente pues medir los impactos para poder defender esa política de datos abiertos y de transparencia en caso de recortes presupuestarios. Entonces, todo eso, ¿no?, resumiendo, ¿no?, y en todo esto, sin duda, tener a alguien dentro de la administración que crea en ese cambio, crean en la bondad de esto, es realmente fundamental. Con esto vuelvo a dejar la palabra a Dustin, que va a hablar, ¿no?, para terminar, de las líneas de investigación que ahora estamos realizando, desarrollando. Estoy aquí haciendo un spoiler. Y dejo entonces a Dustin la palabra.
Thank you, Lucia, and we cambio inglés otra vez. The common theme has been, how do we design, measure, and evaluate pathways to water security in stressed rivers, noting that information and evaluation are critical underpinnings for developing innovative pathways. The lessons that we've shown today are from two examples, water market reforms in Australia and the open data development in the context of Spain. And these show two examples of rivers facing similar challenges and developing approaches for more efficient and equitable allocation. Our current research is building on this work to develop place-based, in-depth observatories of institutional adaptation to water allocation challenges, and to come up with a data architecture that can benchmark and evaluate the performance of the allocation reforms developed in different parts of the world. Australia, Spain, and the US, which is referenced earlier, are three examples of water management in federal countries. A country where water and water management is divided between federal competencies at the national level and state or regional responsibilities at the subnational level. These present a specific type of transboundary challenge to water management, which is actually prevalent worldwide. Our first step was to demonstrate how these three examples are are similar to the challenges faced in many other parts of the world. The map that you see here is a map of the world's federal rivers. These are major river basins that are either within a federal country or are shared by a federal country. And in these river basins, the pathways to water security and the allocation reforms designed to enhance efficiency and equitable allocation need to occur in a transboundary context where coordination challenges are going to be an important aspect of the institutional reforms. And just to emphasize, these major river basins come in three types. You have in green, international rivers. These are rivers shared by 2 or more countries. And a federal international river has at least one federal country, which also will have the internal division of authority and powers that are experienced in the examples that we've provided today. You also have domestic rivers, these rivers that are shaded in blue, which are shared by 2 or more states or subnational jurisdictions within a federal country. And finally, in the gold, you have an intrastate river, a river that falls within one state or subnational jurisdiction within a federal country. All 3 of these different types of rivers address and require addressing the types of coordination challenges that are experienced in federal countries. And we wanted to use this global map as a starting point for developing transferable lessons about the types of pathways to water security that are relevant in different types of federal rivers. And it's in this context that we have been, over the last 2 years, developing an in-depth observatory of adaptation within the Rio Bravo and Rio Grande, because it's really an archetypical federal river. It's an international federal river that's shared by 2 countries, Mexico and the US. And within each of the countries, it's shared by multiple states. So this requires coordination of the pathways to water allocation reform at both the domestic interstate level and internationally. Over the last 2 years, we've developed a project called TRACE, or Transboundary Rivers and Adaptation to Climate Extremes, where we have been focused on identifying and measuring the different types of coordination venues used to respond to extreme climate events, and specifically to deal with droughts and severe droughts within a transboundary river of this context. It's in this process that we've been developing and piloting a data architecture that can be used to assess the evolution and performance of adaptation strategies in federal rivers like the Rio Bravo and Rio Grande. And it's in that process we've found that droughts and extreme climate events really provide that crisis, that opportunity for addressing some of the chronic stressors that could be related to irrigation efficiency and management, that could be related to groundwater demand and groundwater pumping, and that can be related to urbanization challenges and some of the specific challenges that arise due to competition between rural and urban uses. And we are actually visiting Mexico these past 2 weeks as part of our field work in northern Mexico and different parts of the Rio Bravo to collect some of the data for this project. And I've already mentioned our interest in coming back after we've finished our analysis to share some of the lessons about the adaptation strategies that are being developed both within the US, within Mexico, and in the international arena to deal with some of these challenges. The other part of the emerging research is to talk a little bit about innovation in these pathways to water security. Earlier, we talked about all of the barriers that come in the way of water allocation reform, the physical, the economic, the cultural barriers. It's in this context that we're focusing at the interface of water and the economy to cultivate and catalyze innovation and engagement to move from observation to transformation. The first step, as Lucia emphasized, is measurement and benchmarking and evaluation. An additional step is to identify and implement solutions that can be scaled. And in the work that we're doing within the Water and the Economy program at the Smith School of Enterprise and the Environment, we've focused on 3 areas of pathways that are needed. First, improving institutional performance. Developing institutional strategies such as water markets, incentive-based approaches, governance capacity development, and related reforms to improve institutional performance. Second, and linked with institutional reform, is the need to harness the information revolution and the potential to develop initiatives that draw on digital water, these types of information revolutions that can be combined with governance capacity, that can be combined with innovative financing strategies to devise pathways to water security. And then to do so by working in partnership with practitioners, working with enterprise broadly defined, the public sector, the private sector, and with civil society and other academics to develop solutions that will be relevant to the local context and different observatories where we're working. And just as illustration, some of the work that's been happening in the area of digital water has been focusing on groundwater management and rural water services in sub-Saharan Africa. This is some work that was just published last month by a colleague, Rob Hope, who's been taking advantage of accelerometers, these devices that are embedded within your phones, to measure the movements of hand pumps and the groundwater use associated with hand pumps in sub-Saharan Africa to first determine whether these pumps are working and functioning effectively, and use that information to provide the data to those who are managing these pumps so they can be fixed, they can deliver more reliable services, and therefore lead to more direct financing and cost recovery so that these hand pumps are more sustainable. But what happened in the process of using this technology was something that was not anticipated. It turned out that by understanding and using machine learning to understand the behavior of those who are using these hand pumps, there could actually derive information around water levels and to develop a network of monitoring sites using these hand pumps to better understand the shifting fluctuations in water levels for groundwater. Now, this is an example of the information revolution, but it needs to be linked to governance capacity in order to use these types of information tools in decision-making around water allocation. And we see examples of this happening in other areas of water management, such as the use of remote sensing technologies, agricultural drones, all of these types of techniques which provide big data and ample water data to inform water management, but there's a bottleneck in terms of moving that into the institutional reform pathways that we've been discussing. So the real exciting opportunity is to move from observatories into innovative solutions that can link the information revolution with institutional reforms, financing, and other kinds of infrastructure investments to develop pathways that can overcome the barriers that we've introduced previously. And I guess to finish, that once you've moved through from measuring and evaluating the pathways in specific parts of the world, it's possible to develop a process that can better tailor and develop a reform process for the specific challenges in different locations internationally. And it's in that context that it really is important to work with local researchers and practitioners who are and working closely in their specific context to develop a network and community of practice who can share lessons as there are experiments and the types of innovations that we've been talking about today. So I hope we have a chance to learn from the work that you're doing here and explore opportunities to learn from each other going forward. Thank you.
Agradecemos la presentación de la doctora Stefano y del doctor Garrik. Bueno, abrimos un espacio para recibir preguntas de todos ustedes. ¿Sí? Creo que son muchos puntos los que ellos trataron como propuesta. Y bueno, solo mientras ustedes piensan sus preguntas, me gustaría resaltar simplemente, bueno, cómo en estos procesos, ¿no? Bien destacan que es importante poder generar la información, en cómo en escenarios en el que el agua se compite por este recurso, ¿no? Tanto entre usuarios, pero también entre sectores, y también reconociendo que en la gestión del agua participan muchos sectores, tanto en el ámbito gubernamental como en el ámbito privado, y también, bueno, cómo el papel de la academia también puede enriquecer a través de la generación de conocimientos y de cómo acercarlos a nuestras sociedades, impulsando la participación de la sociedad civil, cómo fortalece estos procesos de transformación de la gestión del agua, ¿no? En nuestras sociedades. Creo que en México tenemos pues ya también un camino, pero ahora estamos otra vez en un momento en el que nos estamos cuestionando estas formas de organización que tenemos, ¿no? Y ahí el gran valor y papel de las instituciones. Y bueno, entonces, ¿cómo podemos también desde nuestro país poder generar estos procesos de cambio? Creo que a través de la academia, también con la formación de recursos humanos, creo que hay mucha gente joven en nuestro auditorio y, bueno, de distintas especialidades también, y de qué manera podemos aportar, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, doy espacio para sus preguntas y, bueno, creo que tendremos un espacio más de discusión al respecto.
Okay, English question for Dr. Garrik now. In regards to boundaries, okay, we have this interstate boundaries, and then we also have the boundaries between countries that share a water resource. But what about the basin, the boundaries of the basins? Sometimes this basins, the boundary between basins is different from the boundary between states and the boundary between countries. And this in particular generates a problem when we have to export water from a basin located, I don't know, 100 kilometers from here to this other basin. So, well, we have this governance, legal issue figure around the boundaries, the man-made boundaries, but what about the real natural boundaries? So what would be the best way to deal with this, in particular with the problem of transferring water from one basin to another basin where we do not have water anymore? So by doing this, we're actually removing water from the first basin, and this would generate a conflict, a competition between the water, the use of the water in the basin where we are getting that water from, and the need for water in the other basin where we do not have water anymore. So what would be the best approach to this type of problem?
Thank you for starting with the easy question. No, a very important question. One of the reasons we've developed this global perspective or picture on federal rivers is because we know that boundaries matter, and we know that many of the water governance and allocation challenges come from the misalignment between political borders and hydrological boundaries. A few examples first, and then I'll answer your question directly. The case of the Colorado River is a good example of the challenge you mentioned. Approximately 75% of the population that draws its drinking water from the basin lives outside of its borders. The lesson from that is to think in terms of systems in addition to basins, and that's what they've been doing in their basin planning. The second example is from the Murray-Darling in Australia, where they've been dealing with this challenge of boundaries and borders in their water markets because they have developed water markets to enhance efficiency, but they've developed basin institutions to coordinate some of the environmental and social externalities associated with water markets. And so the goal that we've been focusing on this presentation is developing more efficient and equitable allocation. And that requires thinking from a systems perspective and coordinating allocation decisions both at the local level and at the system level. And then on the case-by-case basis, that's going to look differently in terms of where's the source region, where's the destination region, what are the distributions of costs and benefits, how does that play out in the short and long term, and where are environmental flows in this process. And so I think that's something I wouldn't want to generalize on, but the experiences in the Colorado and the Murray-Darling show that it's helpful to think not only in terms of political borders or hydrological boundaries, but from a systems perspective, and then within that systems perspective to develop the institutions to manage trade-offs between economic uses and ecological outcomes.
Okay, and now the second question, kind of related to the same thing and to the water markets. Oh, yeah, by the way, I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. Federico Moritz from the Instituto de Ingeniería. Now, regarding the water market, it's not that I'm a communist or something. I do believe in markets, but wouldn't it be a dangerous proposition to have a water market where water might turn into a commodity and might be subject to speculation? I mean, at least from my point of view, water shouldn't be subject to speculation and be left alone to the powers of market. It should be overwatched by society, by the government in a very jealous way, because if there's no water, there's no nothing, basically. There's no agriculture, there's no food production, there's no industry, there's nothing. So I don't know if it would be a risky proposition to hand water over to the markets.
Well, thank you for that question. It's fundamentally an ethical issue around values, but I also have a practical perspective on this, which is that you have free markets and you have markets. Free markets are premised under deregulation, under the assumption that there isn't a strong governance capacity to address some of those values issues. My thesis is that markets are the servants of sound governance. And when they've worked, including in the Murray-Darling, it's because of the combination of market-based incentives as well as strong regulatory frameworks, strong information systems, and forums for the types of decisions and political debates that are needed as part of water allocation. So I tend to be really in the dangerous territory where I get critiqued by free market environmentalists, and I get critiqued from the people who are extremely critical about markets, because I see that they have an essential role to play, but that they need to be embedded within strong governance frameworks. And I think one thing to consider is that by treating water as separate and not as a commodity, it means that other types of markets and market incentives are going to end up having an influence, whether it's energy markets or agricultural markets or other types of market exchanges. So it's I think important to focus more on what role do markets play in efficiently allocating water resources, and how do they need to be combined with a portfolio of other information and regulatory and infrastructure systems in order to get the kinds of outcomes that society wants for its allocation.
Quería añadir sobre la primera pregunta. Primero, bueno, yo creo que está demostrado que realmente los trasvases transfieren agua y también transfieren conflictos, ¿no? O sea, lo que se hace es, hay una dificultad y lo que se hace es, se externaliza esa escasez fuera del lugar, ¿no? donde se ha creado. Entonces, sin duda, cuanto más alejados son la zona de origen de la zona donde se utiliza, mayor va a ser el impacto de esas transferencias. Sin embargo, yo creo que en algunos casos pues, es inevitable, ¿no? Sobre todo si hablamos de zonas urbanas, pues realmente a veces quizás haya que asumir esos impactos, ¿no? Y en cuanto a los mercados, también decir que los mercados se puede estar de acuerdo o no, pero quizás cuanto más alejados sean de dónde se coge el agua, dónde se compra y dónde se usa, pues cuanto más sea grande la distancia, mayores pueden ser los problemas, ¿no? Y de hecho estudiamos en España los mercados informales que ocurren, digamos, al margen de los mercados formales que también existen, y se vio que realmente eran soluciones interesantes que ocurrían entre los usuarios o incluso entre municipios y agricultores, que era una manera espontánea de organizarse que ayudaban a resolver localmente problemas de escasez sin transferirlos lejos de esas zonas. Y decir que en España ha habido muchísimo debate sobre el tema de la escala de la gestión, porque tradicionalmente en España el agua se ha gestionado por cuencas hidrográficas y debido a la descentralización que está ocurriendo en España, pues se ha planteado las comunidades autónomas, que son las regiones, que son como casi estados, pues han empezado a pedir más competencia sobre el agua, lo que hablaba yo antes de reparto del poder y el reparto del agua, ¿no? Y entonces se abrió mucho el debate sobre si había que cambiar ese modelo de gestión por cuenca, y lo que resultó claro es que realmente, quizás porque trabajamos en agua, pues nos centramos en esos boundaries, ¿no? Pero hay otros sistemas, o sea, la electricidad, la agricultura, los espacios naturales protegidos, las infraestructuras lineales, que tienen otra escala y que también y que hacen que realmente quizás nos fijemos en el agua, pero que tienen también una relevancia. Entonces yo creo que lo que me decía Dustin son una serie de sistemas que se superponen, y elegir la elección de la cuenca yo creo que es una buena elección, funciona, pero quizás no hay que ser demasiado dogmáticos porque hay muchos otros sistemas que nosotros quizás desde el agua por lo menos no vemos tanto, y que también son muy relevantes y que necesitan inputs de muchas otras fuentes, ¿no? Entonces es un debate interesante, pero quizás no hay solo una solución. No creo que necesariamente solo que pueda ser la cuenca la mejor solución, ¿no?
So I have a question regarding. I have a question regarding the graph that you showed with the correlation. Sorry, Dr. Garrik. The graph that you showed showing correlation between the amount of money that was spent by governments or federal entities and the size of the market. What do you see the role of international aid or international banks in the global south, and how will that affect the markets in those areas? Is there kind of that backwards correlation? If there is this outside funding, will we see the markets become difficult to manage within the country, kind of along those lines?
Thanks for the question. And start in terms of the graphic to emphasize, of course, this was the Australian context, which is an advanced economy and where the per capita investment in water resource management is relatively high. And the purpose of that chart is to demonstrate that both markets and governance capacity have been needed to respond to drought, have been needed to respond to competition over water. But the correlation is not causation, right? And so if you start to move into the global south and into these other contexts, that relationship is going to be much different. And I wouldn't be able to say much about how those international investments are going to affect the informal or formal water markets and water reallocation or allocation mechanisms used in these regions. But I will, step back from that chart and emphasize some of the lessons that we learned from our work reconstructing historical pathways to water security. And it basically showed how the investments in infrastructure in developing contexts required the parallel investments and coordinated investments in institutional capacity and information systems in order to really achieve their full benefits and to contribute to growth, to addressing poverty and inequality challenges and things of this nature. So that's another example of a correlation, which more relevant in the global south, is showing how these investments are moving from the project level of an individual dam, for example, to portfolios. And we've been learning, for example, in some of our work in the Rio Bravo about portfolios that have been developed in the case of urban water supply in Monterrey, where a dam project, El Cuchillo, is part of an integrated system of work, such as other measures described as the Monterrey 4 program of investments. And I think that is a really relevant example of how this shift has occurred from projects to pathways, and how when we start to talk about the development of markets, it's really going to be a byproduct of the development of strong institutions, the development of infrastructure, the development of information.
Sorry, I understood that you said about the value of information, and that the system of information needs to show some benefits in order to be sustainable. Could you elaborate on that? How can you do that in a practical way?
Sí. La pregunta, ese tema surgió muy claramente en cuanto a la utilización, al tema de datos abiertos. Datos abiertos son datos que no están disponibles, por ejemplo, en PDF, sino que son datos que se pueden descargar y utilizar para generar nueva información. Y lo que se vio es que ese tipo de información puede ser utilizado, por ejemplo, por el sector privado para generar nuevos productos y riqueza, ¿no? Generar proyectos, generar estudios. Y de esa manera, o sea, lo que están buscando como formas de medir los beneficios económicos de esa utilización de la información para producir, pues, para generar negocio y movimiento, digamos, del conocimiento. Y de la misma manera, si lo vemos desde el punto de vista de la sociedad, si la información está disponible, puede ser reutilizada, puede ser sin necesidad de un procesamiento muy intensivo, ¿no? Para extraer los datos, es posible generar unas aplicaciones, generar servicios para el ciudadano que realmente pueden generar beneficios directos. Pensemos en el transporte, ponían un ejemplo de tener accesible información sobre temas de transporte en la ciudad, pues pueden generar beneficios para personas con disabilidades, porque pueden conocer con más facilidad cómo desplazarse y dónde desplazarse. Entonces, eso al final genera también una riqueza. Solo un ejemplo, pero también genera riqueza, y eso hace que si se puede medir, si se consigue medir ese beneficio para la sociedad, para el sector privado y para la academia, porque también genera conocimiento, ¿no? Es un beneficio. Si se consigue medir, se tiene un instrumento para defender políticas de acceso a los datos cuando hay recortes presupuestarios. Y eso es algo que es muy claro, ¿no? Que aparece muy claramente en la comunidad de datos abiertos, ¿no? Demostrar que merece la pena compartir datos, porque es un gasto grande, es un esfuerzo importante, es una inversión a largo plazo que necesita tener visión, y por tanto hay que, de alguna manera, si se hace una inversión, hay que ver qué beneficios tiene, porque si no, pues se corta esa inversión.
¿Hay que pagar?
A ver, puede haber casos en que se puede pagar, depende del tipo de usuario y del tipo de acceso que hace a ellos. Si es un acceso masivo, es posible que se pueda pedir pagar por los datos. O sea, ahí no hay, en la comunidad de datos abiertos no hay, no es dogmático. O sea, es posible que haya necesidad de hacer, sobre todo si se está prestando un servicio, ¿no? Normalmente para la sociedad, pues se entiende, para, digamos, la sociedad civil, la idea es que no haya que pagar por el dato. Pero depende también del uso que se hace de ello y de cuánto se carga el sistema accediendo a esos datos, ¿no? El gasto que se genera por acceder a esos datos.
Yeah, I was wondering, how can you implement this, what you propose here, in regions or countries with high economic subsidies? For instance, if you go to a river basin where the government it gives subsidies huge subsidies to the farmers, for instance. I mean, how can the issue of the economic subsidies can dampen the efficiency of water markets? And how can you overcome this? Or to both? Or so the question is about the role of subsidies, economic subsidies, for a, let's say, sound or sustainable water markets.
Well, there actually is, I think, a link between the two.
I thought it was about information, so I was confused. Okay.
So let me try to address the subsidy issue, which is that in basic terms, that's going to affect the potential gains from trade and the competitiveness of agricultural markets, which will determine whether there is a real difference in the value of water across uses and how that affects the pressure to reallocate. So I think that's the issue around subsidies, and in places where water markets have been most advanced, subsidies have been reduced or eliminated. So that's the first aspect. In terms of information, I mean, one of the things that I would have added to the previous question is that it's not just about whether the people will pay for the data, but is what's the cost of collecting the data. And there are ways to lower the cost of the data at the same time that it's providing the benefits. And that has been a really good illustration in the case of Australia, where government accounting systems and monitoring networks and regulations have created a data architecture to support the collection and distribution of information around the water market, as well as other key variables that are needed for water management, such as supply and demand, and such as the issues around water management capacity. And in this case, the benefit of the information has been that it's given greater value to the water rights within the system. The costs of the information have decreased because the government set up the data architecture infrastructure for collecting that. And so I think that's an example where information has really fueled the development of the market. In fact, markets are just a way of communicating information, and the allocation reforms, the government programs have been catalytic in getting the data and monitoring systems to support those allocation efforts.
Hola, yo tengo una pregunta acerca de la información. ¿Ustedes ponen a disposición de cualquier persona pública o privada información, pero hacen algún filtrado o depuran la información? ¿O simplemente la que recolectan del gobierno o de las instituciones la ponen a disposición en la nube o donde sea?
No somos los que ponemos. Y fundamentalmente, o sea, la idea es que nos hemos centrado sobre todo en el sector público, ¿no? Y nuestra unidad de análisis han sido los organismos de cuenca, y hemos observado, hemos medido hasta qué punto se pone a disposición la información, y ahora el siguiente paso en colaboración con ellos es intentar que esa información, además de estar en PDFs o por ejemplo en Excel, pero que sin metadatos, pues que sea una información que también se pueda manejar y que se pueda reelaborar de manera sencilla. Entonces, y la idea también es, cuando se habla de datos abiertos, es que haya unos sistemas de descarga de datos fáciles. Hay todos unos estándares técnicos para que se pueda para que un sistema, ¿no? Se habla de usuarios industriales, es decir, usuarios que saben manejar grandes cantidades de datos, pues puedan comunicarse directamente con el sistema, por ejemplo, con el sistema de información del agua del Ministerio de Agricultura y Medio Ambiente español, para bajarse esos datos. Lo que sí es importante decir, que se relaciona con lo que estaba diciendo Dustin, es que hace falta tener una buena estructura de los datos, porque si no, los costos de poner a disposición esos datos son totalmente insostenibles. Totalmente insostenibles. O sea, que tiene que haber una estrategia clara por parte de quien pone a disposición los datos.
Sobre la información, quería preguntar cómo manejan cambios de administración. Específicamente, pues aquí en México, también en los Estados Unidos, es muy común que con cambios de administración cambia la disponibilidad de los datos y también la recolección de datos en el campo. Entonces, ¿cómo incorporan eso en sus modelos de qué tan bueno es la información o algo así?
Pues eso ocurre, yo creo que en todos los sitios y en España también. Nosotros hemos calculado el índice de transparencia de la gestión del agua durante 4 años, en 4 ediciones, distintas administraciones, y hemos visto claramente que la calidad, el tipo de información que había reflejaba en buena medida, ¿no? Si había habido cambios en el gobierno regional o había cambios en el director del organismo, en la presidencia del organismo de Cuenca. Y entonces poco se puede hacer, ¿no? De hecho, por ejemplo, el sistema de información del agua del Ministerio del Medio Ambiente estaba haciendo un buen trabajo y ha quedado, lo han dejado inoperativo, ¿no? Entonces yo creo que es por eso exactamente, porque alguien pues ha cambiado el gobierno, ha cambiado el director y no ha visto el interés o el valor, o ha visto incluso el peligro de hacer eso, ¿no? Entonces por eso decía que también es importante dar seguimiento a eso, para permitir, ¿no?, darse cuenta de esos cambios y pues por lo menos que saberlo, ¿no?, que se sepa para que pues se pueda intentar evitar dar continuidad a la recogida de datos. Incluso la crisis económica que empezó en 2008 con toda la crisis global ha tenido un impacto tremendo sobre la recogida de datos en España. Ahí hay muchísima alarma porque no se están dejando de recoger datos, ¿no?, que creo que también ha ocurrido, ¿no?, por lo que puede ver, ¿no?, aquí en México también ha habido una bajada en la recogida de datos, y eso pues son datos que se han perdido, ¿no?, y no se van a poder recuperar. Pero por lo menos intentando medir esa disponibilidad de datos, pues se puede ayudar a por lo menos que se sepa y poner medidas, ¿no?, para remediarlo.
So in Mexico, we have already since 1992 regulated system of water markets in order to transfer from one user to another user. And that is already in the law, so it's a legal process. But I think that in many cases, say the Valley of Mexico, it's a case, these markets are kind of out of the law. And we are very much afraid of open information on that. So, and I think that for the markets to function well, you need to provide information to the people that are going to sell or buy. If I say that in many of the environments in Mexico, they say selling and buying is not a legal process. It is legal. It is in the law. But we treat it as something which is illegal because we don't have enough information. So we leave that to coyotes, to people that are really not gaining because the information is hidden. So almost as an illegal process, I have to go and look at the different people and who is willing to sell, instead of having a mechanism in which you can advertise who's selling and who's buying. Is there an experience that you have on this type of information, data and information, and open information in order to have the markets to function well in a legal way?
It's a great question. Let me refer to the Australian experience to start. I mean, one of the points I mentioned was that Australia's water market reforms have been a 30-year overnight success, and the development of a institutional framework of information systems took a long period. And it's worth remembering those experiences and lessons in other parts of the world, because in the initial phases of the water market reform, there was substantial resistance from irrigators about measurement, around information, around the types of systems that would be needed to fuel a market. The other main message that I talked about with their reforms was how they were able to address some of those concerns by engaging with water users, and in particular demonstrating how markets could be used as a risk management tool for farmers. And after developing that support from the water users, they were actually getting demand from the water users to strengthen measurement, to strengthen accounting systems, to help support the development of the market. And in the later stages of that 30-year period, the federal government took on the development of a national water accounting system, working with states and tracking water supply, water demand, water rights, and changes in water rights. Those four variables ended up being critical to support the next stages of the growth of the market. And I point to Australia because it's almost impossible to think about some of those things happening in other parts of the world, even in places where there's substantial capacity and political will to do it. And so I think my most practical suggestion is to focus on a place where there's a pilot or a demonstration where a relatively small-scale clearinghouse of information, as well as support from water users and those who are seeking to use these kinds of reallocation tools, could demonstrate the benefits associated with these kinds of accounting frameworks.
Y es la comunidad que analiza los mercados de agua en la academia es bastante pequeña. Yo estuve hace poco en un seminario que reunía a todas las personas que trabajamos en este tema y decíamos entre nosotros, ese es como el intercambio de cromos. Y no sé si se dice también aquí en México, los cromos son los jugadores, ¿no? Yo te doy, mira, me he enterado de que aquí se han intercambiado esta agua y entre este se ha pagado tanto, o sea, hay un intercambio de cromos, entonces cada investigador consigue a través de su contacto, o sea, he hablado con mi primo en el bar del pueblo que me ha dicho, realmente así, sí, literalmente, ¿no? No puedo decir la fuente.
Eso es.
Y eso lo que hace es realmente generar, yo creo, al final termina, como no se puede evaluar, ¿no?, la experiencia, o es muy difícil, es muy incompleta lo que se sabe, termina generando reticencias, ¿no? Diciendo, si tenéis algo que esconder, ¿por qué no se puede saber cuántos han vendido, cuántos han comprado, cuánto se ha pagado, ¿no? ¿Cómo se ha llegado a ese precio? Entonces yo creo que es algo que al final se puede revertir en contra del buen funcionamiento de los mercados, ¿no? Que en España la verdad que no terminan de arrancar, han funcionado sobre todo en épocas de sequía y entre cuencas, ¿no? Eso es lo que ha funcionado. Pero existe sin duda en España también esa dificultad para conseguir información completa sobre los mercados.
¿Alguna pregunta? Ok, bueno, si no hay más preguntas, entonces no me queda más que agradecer a todos ustedes su participación en esta sesión. También agradecer a la doctora Lucia y al doctor Dustin. Thank you very much. Y, bueno, from our network and the Institute of Engineering, we have a little present for you, and thank you very much again. Si necesitan constancias, por favor también nos informan, y las presentaciones, como siempre en la red, estarán disponibles en nuestro portal. Buenas tardes a todos y muchas gracias.